I still hear you when you pray. Down on your knees to God in that old-fashioned way. Oh, preacher man, I still hear you today. In a little old log schoolhouse, we used it every day. Went to school 5 days a week. On Sunday, that's where we prayed. I can still hear the preacher man, for a mile he could be heard. Walking up and down the aisle, he preached the gospel word.
Welcome, everyone, back to Presbycast. If you're watching live, slightly later start than normal, but that's okay. We're here, and I don't know. Our last episode, we were walking through the confession, and so this will be... Well, no, last week was Brad, or Chortles, had just gotten back from Birmingham, and so as we were talking about the Church Arise conference that he was at, presented by the Gospel Reformation Network. But back to our regularly scheduled source of programming, as we call it, mobile, agile, juvenile, but altogether the podcast you know and love. So as we come on in, we thought we'd welcome everyone. We'd also thought we'd welcome our guest with some of that good old Southern Bavarian bluegrass music, just like the Lutherans of old used to listen to. I think this is now the third time we've had this guest on the show, and so many people will recognize and enjoy the name. We've always had a good time every time he's on. So Chortles, why don't you do the honors and we'll talk along.
Well, it's Hans Fiene of, again, Lutheran Satire fame and other endeavors. I think he does a little pastoring during on the weekends. So tell us what's going on in the Lutheran world.
Nothing special. I did want to note Bavarians are Catholics. Those are the German Catholics.
Oh.
So I really wish we could lay claim to having invented Oktoberfest, but we did not. Although that's like it's a strange thing that Lutherans love to complain about things being too Catholic, but Lutheran churches also love to put on Oktoberfest, which is a very Catholic thing to do. But I suppose you take the best out of every tradition that you can find. No, things in Lutheranism are good. You know, going through the same weird year and struggles as everybody else. Working to strengthen our trust in our Lord during this extended COVID season, and clinging to His promises in an uncertain and very silly world.
It doesn't seem to be getting less silly.
No, more silly seems to be the general trajectory.
Like I'm always like the line from Monty Python and Holy Grail, like, let us not go to Camelot. It is a silly place.
Right,
like
yeah.
we're firmly at that outside looking in.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're in it.
So you are in the St. Louis area?
Yeah, I'm a pastor at Prince of Peace Lutheran Church in Crestwood, Missouri, which is just right outside of St. Louis / sort of part of St. Louis. Great, certainly the greater St. Louis metroplex, but I think we probably border the city limits and stuff. We're in St. Louis County, so yeah, and kind of the mecca of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Well, we're going to be there in late June, early July for the PCA General Assembly.
That's the worst time to come to St. Louis because we have the Mississippi and the Missouri and like 700 other rivers here, and so I think the only place in the country where you'll find worse humidity during the summertime is maybe Houston. So you guys messed up.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Normally it would be a little earlier in June, but you know how we were fortunate to be able to pull it off at all this year.
Right.
Are you aware, and I don't blame you if you are not, are you aware of the PCA institutions in St. Louis?
No.
We have a seminary there.
Oh, okay. I think I did know that. Yes. There's a guy down the road from me who's a buddy of mine who's a good Presbyterian fellow that I like, and so but we don't we talk, but not often enough for me to really be super aware of what hijinks the Presbyterians in St. Louis are getting themselves into.
Well, it's just as well, but let's just say most of the controversy is centered there.
Okay.
At this time, but maybe we'll run into you at a convenience store or something in late
That would
June.
be lovely. I would love to run into you in a convenience store.
Well, I'm
we
a
can all
connoisseur.
hoard. We can all hoard Newports together. You know?
So I'm a connoisseur of off-brand snack chips. So I do like to visit those unusual locales to check those out.
Good.
So do you have any suggestions for the literally 2,000 Presbyterians who will be in St. Louis and pretty much downtown, I guess?
My general advice for Presbyterians is to become Lutherans. So that's my advice for them. Beyond that, no. I have not. So I've been here a little less than a year. And much of the world has been shut down since then. So it's very odd because I only feel like I've been here about 3 months. So I still don't know a lot about the area. I haven't spent much time downtown, so I can't really give you any advice there. So come to St. Louis, become Missouri Synod Lutherans, and then go do what you like after that.
Well, you're a stranger in a strange land then.
Yeah.
And I think we talked to you right after COVID kicked off.
I think that's right, yeah.
And you hadn't been there long. I now remember that. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's messed up everywhere right now, as you know. But you're still generating content. You are you're
The greats always do.
you're the brain behind Lutheran Satire, though I gather you have some help. And this is not a completely fresh piece of content we're going to play, but we want to play this as a conversation starter. And I'm not going to mute us because we might have to laugh or make some exclamations during this video. It's about 5 minutes, but has great audio too. So our podcast only listeners will benefit from it. But this is it's kind of speed dating with online church interfaces. So tell us a little bit about this video before we start it.
Yeah, so the idea was I came across on YouTube these really hilarious video snippets of, I kind of vaguely remember seeing commercials for this when I was a kid. It was video dating, was like the late 80s kind of thing, where the idea was you'd go into one of these places and you would record yourself talking about yourself and why you'd be a good person for someone to go out with. And then you'd get to watch videos of other people. And of course, they're all horrifying and just completely embarrassing. And there's a really hilarious video you can watch of someone putting up a compilation of these things. And some of them, the folks are sweet, and some of them you watch and you can immediately tell why they were single. And so I somehow got the idea of if church bodies were to do that. So if someone, so the idea is each character in the video is representative of a certain ecclesiastical tradition, different confession of faith. And so it's them trying to sell themselves on the person watching the video. It's their kind of elevator pitch for their particular denomination.
I think these are mostly what we would call, there's Roman Catholics, Episcopalians, probably liberal Lutherans and confessional Lutherans, and then a megachurch guy who just represents everybody else. Pretty much.
I kind of tried to cover the broadly everyone. Didn't get the Eastern Orthodox in there, but Roman Catholics, my tribe, the confessional Lutherans, kind of general liberal omniprots, and then sort of sweethearted but not terribly Orthodox, Protestant groups.
Yeah, and you did a cheeky thing. I think you used a male face on a female body in a couple of cases.
I'd have to watch it again, but I'm not sure. I don't think I did, but we'll see.
We're going to see it right now. Right. So anything else you want to set this up with?
No.
All right. Well, let's see how this goes.
Are you looking for a church? But you're tired of the search, and you don't want to wait. Don't hesitate, come to Video Church Days.
So I just talking to the camera here?
Yeah, that's right. Just give us your name and church body.
Father Chris, Roman Catholic.
Pastor Sue, Methodist?
The Reverend Martin Augsburg Ernst, unyielding, unwavering, uncompromising, confessional Lutheran.
Hey, it's Rev Raz here, Episco-Lutheran, Progressive Branch.
Chase, just Christian, beyond denominations.
Is it Pastor Chase?
Nah, bro, I don't like titles. Titles only separate the pastor from the people. You feel me? I don't want anything separating me from my people, except my socioeconomic status.
So tell us why people should pick your church.
Oh, I don't know. We love the Lord and we don't like fighting. We're friendly and flexible about what we believe. We're what would happen if Chick-fil-A had a baby with half of the Apostles' Creed.
Incarnational preaching, sacramentology, liturgical propriety. If you know what these things mean but inexplicably don't already belong to my church, you will love my church.
Whenever people come to my church, they always say, Chase, you're not like other pastors. Chase, you're young. Chase, you're relevant. Chase, you make cool references to semi-pornographic HBO shows in your sermons.
Why should you come to my church? Well, at my church, we won't judge you. We won't condemn you. We won't reject you or hurt you or save you.
Also, we have a lot of activities for our members. We have knitting club, quilting club, talk about your feelings club.
You have any clubs for men?
Those are the clubs for men.
Why should you join the Catholic Church? Well, you know, we got everything. We got the Pope, we got apostolic succession and tradition. You know, we've got baggage. We've got a lot of baggage.
Every Sunday, we preach Christ and Him crucified. Every week, God fills us with love and peace and joy. That's why we're mad all the time.
So, you remember when you were in college and you'd be at a party and you were crying about how your boyfriend was mean to you, and you know how there was that guy who would dry your tears and he'd tell you how you deserved so much better and how you were perfect just the way you were?
You mean the guy that girls never want to date because he's so desperate and wimpy?
Yeah, we're like the church version of that guy.
We're warm and cozy and a little silly sometimes. We're like if your mom's favorite Christmas sweater failed out of seminary.
So who is welcome at your church?
Oh my goodness, everyone is welcome here.
Everybody's welcome here.
Yo, everybody's welcome here.
As our 80-year-olds can tell you, we're a great congregation for the elderly. We're also a great church for younger people in that 70 to 79-year-old range.
Yeah, everyone's welcome in the Catholic Church, so we'd love for all of you to come worship with us, pray with us, and, you know, maybe give some offerings, because we've sort of had a bunch of legal expenses lately. Whatever your background, you are welcome with us. If you believe in the rapture, that's dope. If you don't, that's dope too. If you believe in free will, cool. If you a monologist, rock on, Donkey Kong. We are not the church that wants to argue. We are the church that wants to transform people's lives through Jesus. And the best way to transform people's lives through Jesus is to never teach people what Jesus taught about stuff.
If you're tired of the works righteousness of the Catholic Church, we're the church for you. If you're sick of the emptiness of evangelicalism, we're the church for you. If you're the kind of person who can only craft an identity by setting himself up in opposition towards someone else, we are definitely the church for you.
We're the church for people who like making friends.
We're the church for people who don't like their friends.
We're the church for people who don't like church.
We're the church for people who don't like God.
We're the church for people who are already the pastor of this church.
We're the church for the marginalized, for the oppressed. We're the church for the homeless, for the refugees and immigrants.
So you have a lot of those people at your church?
No, we have zoning laws for a reason, guys.
Hey kids, do you hate climate change? Well, if you hate climate change, you're gonna love the new Roman Catholic Church. You are going to have to hate climate change more than you hate something worse, though. Bro, I cannot believe the ungodly way that you have handled your scandal. I know. Just moving a guy from one congregation to another. I know, it's absolutely terrible. When all you gotta do is take a 6-month punishment vacation, then hop back on Twitter, say God has restored you like he did King David, and then insist that anyone who doesn't like it just doesn't get the gospel. Yeah, I think that's just as bad.
Counterpoint, is it though?
All right. Well, that
Yes, it is.
There are so many winning lines in that video.
Thanks.
You covered all the bases except us, really.
I started writing a follow up. It was a while ago. I didn't finish it. I'll get to it at some point because I wanted to include the groups that I didn't include. One was the Greek Orthodox guy who didn't get the concept of people who don't share your ethnicity going to your church. And then with the Presbyterians, it was just two Presbyterians who started arguing with each other about how the other one wasn't really Presbyterian.
Oh, well, that's legit. That's fine. Yeah.
Something like that.
That would have been perfect. So
yeah, we'll get to it eventually.
Yes, we will. I couldn't help but noticing that in that video, there were at least two of the pastors were females, and I'm sorry that I assumed that one was a male, but you're telling me that
we don't know how Rev Raz chooses to identify, so that's anybody's guess at this point.
Well, I'm sure you can catch us up on the issue of the first trans bishop in and just like with Presbyterians, there's a liberal version of us, and the ELCA would be that for you, and they now have a trans bishop. I've joked for years about mostly PCUSA female pastors. They all seem to be named Caitlin or Megan, and this is Bishop Megan. I think Rohrer is the last name. And any thoughts on that as we launch into this idea of women pastors and preachers?
Yeah, I saw the headline of the story, but didn't read it because there's no point. This is kind of all that these mainline liberal denominations really have to kind of keep themselves in the news is first insert abomination here to become ordained pastor in this church body or bishop or kind of whatever it is. It kind of reminds me of how when back in the days when movies used to come out into theaters, and they would, and whenever a movie would come out into theaters, they would try to explain to you why the movie was so successful, but sometimes they didn't actually really have that great a success, and so they would go, "This movie made the most money for a Wednesday afternoon release that came out at 2:00 Eastern time." In the month of June, and you go, oh, that's like 400 words too many to be a statistic, or 400 words too many to be an accomplishment. And that's kind of how I feel about that stuff. Is like, we get it. You guys are not interested in faithfulness to the scriptures. You have found your identity in being the Democratic Party at prayer. Of being hardcore leftists with a little bit of religious iconography thrown in. It's not an accomplishment. So you can pat yourselves on the back for this, but it's not actually something it's not actually a real accomplishment.
We should remember that the journey to having transsexual or lesbian or male homosexual pastors, bishops, leaders in the mainline churches began, fairly humbly, and that was with just first with officers, then with pastors. It always follows that trajectory, and always in the name of well, I think it's marketing at some point, but it may be with the mainline churches that they're running out of bodies. Is that part of it?
Yeah, well, like I said, it's they don't have anything else to keep them in the news. I mean, nobody goes to their churches; they're hemorrhaging members. For some odd reason, having your overarching, your central doctrine be you don't need Jesus, and therefore you don't need the church, is not a terribly compelling sales pitch. It would be sort of like if there's a new burger joint that opened up by you and you went in and you said, oh, well, why should I get burgers here? And they go, oh, they're the same as anywhere else. They're not any better. The burgers that you can get anywhere else are just as good as the ones you can get here. And you go, oh, okay, well then, I guess I won't bother wasting my time then, And so for so much of these liberal mainline denominations, they fully embraced universalism. They fully embraced every sexual sin that's been embraced by the culture. So you can't get them to say that anything is actual sin. Like they, aside from all the sins that they don't commit of supposedly of racism and homophobia and blah 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 blah. So you can't get anyone to actually say that you're a sinner, and then on top of that, you can't get anyone to actually say that you need forgiveness and that you need salvation in Jesus. So there's not really any compelling reason for them to exist beyond. I've often joked that I saw a video a couple of months ago of I think it was a Presbyterian church, liberal Presbyterian church, that had some young lady who was, for their call to worship, she was very theatrically singing this song from the musical Pippin, which I only know because my older sister was super into musical theater when I was growing up. And it was with the words slightly changed in a couple of spots. And I watched it and I realized, oh, that's what happens to musical theater majors when they don't make it on Broadway. So basically, liberal seminaries are a jobs program for unemployed musical theater majors. That's what mainline denominations essentially exist for at this point, is just to give people who want attention but don't want Jesus. That's a way to give them the illusion of some sort of divine blessing.
Yeah, I mean, it is a jobs program for underemployed graphic designers and like drama majors, as you've said, sociologists, all sorts of things. So these mainline churches, at least they're offering a product that you can't get anywhere else, because you can't get, bad art and mediocre music in a soup kitchen. I mean, you can't find those things in a city in particular.
Right. Yeah, they are offering a unique product. It's just that nobody wants it. So that's that's the downside.
Well, so that's not where any of us want to end up, and whatever trajectory would be taking us there, we should probably question, or as the sociologists say, interrogate. We should interrogate this trajectory that we're on. I assume the very excellent Twitter thread that you launched in the last couple of days probably was prompted by moves in the evangelical world. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I only saw a bit of it. I saw Albert Mohler commenting on stuff, and then I saw that Saddleback Church is now having now allowing. Well, I don't like the phrase allowing women pastors, because it's a premise that I firmly reject. So the only way you can be a pastor is if God calls you to be a pastor, and God says in the scriptures that the office of the ministry is not to be carried out by women. So women can pretend to be pastors, and so congregations, I suppose, can allow women to pretend to be pastors, but they can't actually be pastors. But yeah, that was the stuff in the general Christian Twitter sphere that I saw floating around.
Well, and the twist here is ordination, which I know you all take ordination seriously.
Sure.
And we do. And of course, almost any of the hierarchical denominations would take the doctrine of ordination seriously. And the different thing is not the title pastor, because there have been a lot of mega churches, some Baptist churches, who throw the word pastor around. It almost means director,
Right.
or a person hired to do this thing.
Right.
But the ordination is the troubling thing now.
Sure, yeah.
So there are many pastors on staff, and I think that sort of the truce that existed until this week was that you can call them pastors, but they can't preach and they can't be the senior pastor. Now, senior pastor is not exactly a biblical term, I think.
Right.
Also think a problem is that the Southern Baptists have a very thin, they have non-binding ecclesiology, but they have very little of it.
Right.
I don't know what the LCMS Book of Discipline or Book of Order looks like, but I'll bet it's more than 20 pages.
Yeah, I mean, so the way the LCMS is structured is that we have congregational autonomy, but not in the sense that a lot of churches would. So, for example, if you're going to be a congregation in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, you have to be served by a pastor who is rostered in our church body. And if you call a pastor that's not rostered in our church body, then you'll get removed from the church body. So you'll, we're different from other church bodies in that if you leave or if you get kicked out of the church body, your property still belongs to you, and things of that nature. But yeah, that your pastors have to actually subscribe to the Lutheran confessions. They have to make what's called a quia subscription to the Lutheran confessions, which means that we believe the Lutheran confessions are a faithful exposition of the Word of God. So we have problems like anybody else does, but the kind of Wild West, just sort of do whatever you want and call yourself whatever you want thing is not nearly as much of a problem as it is certainly in other church bodies that have our church discipline does not always work the way that it should, but there's at least a structure and a process there, as opposed to a lot of other church bodies where it's legitimately non-existent.
All right, so that was the trigger for this. Let's look at what you wrote. I thought it was, it was funny, as apparently Lutherans are allowed to be humorous. Presbyterians typically are not, and sometimes get in trouble for attempting to be so. But let's do, what were you thinking when you wrote this particular thread, which has some very low-grade potty words in there, and abbreviated and asterisk out.
Right.
So,
but importantly distinctive from one another.
I wish that there were other terms for this, because I actually think these are very important concepts.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Not only in theology, but just human behavior altogether. But certainly from a pastoral care standpoint. This was an observation I made a while ago, something that just kind of clicked in my brain one day. And it's just monumentally helpful at understanding how to approach issues with people. So the idea is that in the English language, we use the terms bull poopy and horse poopy. We oftentimes use them synonymously, but they are actually very different concepts that reflect very different and almost kind of inverse ideas. So, and I'll just call them bull and horse for short. So, bull is the idea of is the term you use for when someone claims that something is true that's not actually true. Horse is the term used for something that is true but ought not be true, something that is true but shouldn't be. So I give the analogy or the example in the thread of if you oversleep for work and you don't want to get in trouble with your boss, you tell him that it's not your fault that you were late because you got carjacked by a group of AK-47 carrying circus clowns. And your boss will hear that and he'll say, well, that's that's bull. That's not true. You're claiming that something is true that's not true. You're trying to convince me of that so that you won't get in trouble. But what you're saying is untrue. But if you're on your way to work and you legitimately got carjacked by a bunch of AK-47 toting circus clowns, you would get out of the car and you'd go, well, this is horse, right? You'd say, this is the stupidest thing in the world. This should not be happening, but it did happen. And oftentimes when that happens in life, when things happen that shouldn't happen, our default response, especially among men, there's a bigger part of this theory, which I'll maybe save for another time, but it's basically that women are primarily bull-related creatures and men are primarily horse-related creatures. But when people encounter horse, their response is to say, well, that shouldn't be the case, so I'm just going to live my life as though it's not true. And it's a very common reaction. I think largely comes out of people struggling with their own powerlessness in the world. So, for example, one of the areas I've noticed this in pastoral care is so let's say that you're a pastor and you find out that a young couple in your congregation, they come and talk to you about how they want to get married, and then you find out they've been living together. And so you sit down and you try to talk with them about what the Bible says about this, about how they have joined themselves together apart from God's word, how there needs to be repentance before you can give them God's blessing on their marriage. And one of the things I've noticed is that the young ladies will insist that what I'm saying is bull. In other words, I say, God says what you're doing is wrong. And they say, no, it's not. It's not wrong because it doesn't feel wrong to me, or because they know it was wrong, but they kind of made their peace with it, and they don't want to have to kind of go through that whole thing again. But they will insist that what I'm saying is not true, and that I'm trying to impose some sense of judgmentalism on her. So she'll get really mad. Whereas the guy never really gets mad. He just will kind of look at the situation and say, well, that's stupid. That, like, you shouldn't, that may be what the Bible says, but that's dumb. You shouldn't expect people to actually live by that. It's the 21st century, so whatever. So the guy will just kind of give up, but the girl will insist that I'm wrong. And it's a very interesting phenomenon how people respond to that. So my point in the thread was, when it comes to the issue of women's ordination, that the proponents of women's ordination are essentially making the accusation that those who hold to the historic position on the issue are BSing them. So that what they're basically doing is they're taking their own misogyny, they're taking their own views of male and female, and they're imposing them on the text, and they're denying women something that belongs to them, right? So if you look at the arguments that they'll make, it's, how could you silence 50% of the population? You're just intimidated by women in positions of authority. You're a misogynist, God isn't. It's that type of stuff. So you are trying to convince me of something that's not true when you say that the Bible says that women can't be pastors. Likewise, as I say in the thread, you'll notice that the advocates of ordaining women will typically only deal with the pertinent texts, in particular 1 Timothy chapter 2 and 1 Corinthians 11. They'll only deal with those texts in a negative sense, meaning that they will tell you what the texts don't mean, but they will never really tell you what the text does mean. So they'll say, well, of course that doesn't mean that women can't preach. Of course that doesn't mean that women can't be pastors. And you go, okay, well then what does the text mean? And then they never really offer a serious answer for that. But then they'll turn to texts that have nothing to do with the issue of ordination, nothing to do with the roles of men and women in the church. And then they'll make their argument over there. So they'll refer to Galatians 3:28, which talks about how in Christ there's neither slave nor free, Greek nor Jew, male nor female. And they'll say that passage somehow determines your entire theology of who can be pastors, and not the passages about who can be pastors. And so what's pretty clear to me with that and all of that is that when they start off demonizing their opponents and saying, you guys are just saying this because you're sexist, and by not actually engaging in the text and by deflecting elsewhere, it's just a bunch of obfuscation, that what's actually happening is they're refusing to legitimately engage the texts about the roles of men and women in the church because on a deep level, they know what the Bible has said. I mean, it is super, super clear. When Paul says, I do not permit for a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, it's really, really clear what it is that he's saying. But they think that that's horse. They don't think the Bible should have said that. And so they're trying to just work a way around where they can just pretend as though the Bible didn't say it. It's very similar. I met a lady once who was talking to me about, she hadn't gone to church in a long time, and she had a baby that she needed baptized in. So she was talking to me about it. And I said, oh, well, yeah, I'm happy to baptize anyone's babies, but we got to talk to you about being a member of the congregation and coming to church and pledging to bring your kid to church and whatnot. And she wouldn't really do that. But her background was that she had been Roman Catholic, but she didn't want to be Catholic anymore because they got mad at her about her divorce. So she wanted to find a church where they wouldn't care that she was divorced. And it was just odd to me that she was telling me about this, and she had no curiosity as to whether or not the Catholic Church was right about that. I'm not a Roman Catholic. There's plenty of things I disagree with them on, even some aspects of their theology of marriage. But if I belong to a church and they say, you did a thing that's sinful, I would hope that my response would not be, oh, I'll just go find a church that tells me it wasn't sinful. I would hope my response would be, well, let me figure out if they're right first. Because if they're right, then that's probably a problem I should get worked out. And if they're wrong, then okay, sure, I'll leave then. But that's the way so many people function is, there are plenty of church. I mean, people see this all the time, especially if you belong to a church that holds to, the historic views on sexuality, on abortion, on divorce, and kind of any number of issues. Whereas, like, people look at it and they basically they look at you and they go, but there's like a ton of other churches that don't make people believe things that are uncomfortable to believe. So why can't we do that? And you go, well, because of what the Bible says. And they're going, well, that's horse patootie. So all those other churches can do it. You guys are getting all bent out of shape. If they can do it, we should be able to do it. So it's just completely sidestepping what the Bible actually commands and just starting off with basically the idea of I have the right to go to a church that doesn't challenge me in any way, shape, or form and doesn't place any burdens on me that I don't want to carry. And this is the way that I can justify not having to carry the burden of being considered a sexist and seeming like I'm stuck in the Middle Ages.
So they do say some of them. This is BS because their higher criticism, their view of Scripture would tend to, they try to justify, maybe they used to say, well, that's not really what it means, or there's only portions of the Bible we can now take to be literal or prescriptive. But I think what you're saying is really they know what it says and they just don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, I have more respect for the position of people who say, well, that's what it says, but Paul was a sexist. Now, I certainly obviously don't agree with that, and I think you're definitely in bad shape spiritually if that's the position you're taking. But it's at least honest. It's at least saying that's very clearly what it says. But for people who will try to make the argument that, for example, the argument that it was culturally conditioned to a specific problem that was happening in the congregations in Ephesus, and so it doesn't really mean what it sounds like. Paul was just trying to kind of get the women to calm down, and then once they were calm, then they can be pastors. But the thing is with 1 Timothy 2 is that right after Paul saying women can't teach or have exercise authority over a man, he goes right to the order of creation. So the idea that the male-only priesthood was, or that Paul's comments were just addressing a specific cultural problem in Ephesus, is completely negated by the fact that Paul says the male-only priesthood comes from the order of creation. It's reflected in how man was created first and how woman was created from man, how Adam was called to be the leader of Eve, how the world fell into sin because he didn't do that. So that this is the way that the vocation is actually to be carried out. Paul's whole point in that greater section in 1 Timothy is he's talking about the roles of men and women in the church, and he's describing how it is as Christians that we fulfill our vocations as males and females, as men and women in the church. So he's saying to women, don't come to church dressed provocatively or trying to show off your wealth. That's not how a woman that's not what you were created to be. But rather you were created to serve God with good works and with a quiet and gentle spirit, and as is described elsewhere. And likewise, that men are so that men lift up your hands in prayer, not in anger, right? So that you are, so that God did not create men with the strength to raise up their arms. He didn't create them for violence or quarreling, but he created them and gave them their strength for praise and for leadership. And then at the end of that section, that strange verse that Paul has about how women will be saved through childbirth, the whole point of it seems like such a strange verse if you take it out of context, but when you leave it in the context, and then when you don't try to make the passage say something that it's not saying, the context is pretty clear. That Paul is saying, women, stick with the vocations that God gave you according to your nature. Don't seek to make yourself leaders and teachers. Don't seek to make yourself pastors, but rather be content being Christian women and be content being Christian mothers. So in other words, stick with being a mother. You don't have to worry about being a pastor. That's a masculine vocation. It doesn't belong to you. Stick with the vocation God has given you of being mothers, and that's where you're going to find your salvation. In the same way that if I had a member who came up to me and said, I feel like I can't really be a true Christian unless I get up and give the sermon on Sunday. And I would say, well, God hasn't called you to be a pastor. He's called you to be a layman. He's called you to hear his word and receive it. So sit your butt in the pew and you'll be saved. Now, of course, by that, I'm not saying the act of sitting down in the pew is going to bring you salvation. But the point is just simply be content being what it is that God has called you to be. And that's where you will find the gifts of salvation that Jesus pours out upon you.
I think the line in the thread here is very powerful. You say the Bible says that women can't be pastors, just as plainly as it says that Jesus is fully divine, but they don't want the Bible to have said that women can't be pastors.
Yeah.
So, we're not liberals, but there are people in our communions who may want to fudge a little bit, and in their case, it's not a matter of whether the Bible's true. It can be whether it's clear, whether it's perspicuous, and whether it's sufficient. A lot of people in our circles, when they see deviations, they don't immediately say, "Well, you don't believe the Bible," but they say, "You don't believe it's enough, and you don't believe it's all we need." I mean, we need sociology, we need the insights of modern science, we need all these other things. And we need to sort of run the Bible through a filter, I guess, and maybe keep the parts we like. So is that a step on the road to denying it altogether?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's helpful to do in reading the scriptures is to, as much as you can, take a step back and just say, would I ever have drawn this conclusion? So if I read the same Bible, looked at the same text, but lived in a completely different context and a completely different world with a completely different view of male and female, would I have magically discovered that the Bible is really ambiguous on this point? And so when it comes to this and you look at this and you go, okay, when did people start discovering that what Paul was saying wasn't really as clear as it seemed to be? And it was right around the time of the various feminist movements and this overhauling of the way that we understood male and female in our culture. And so you look at that and you go, okay, well, I don't think this was a matter of we read something and we were all really, really certain as to what it meant, but we shouldn't have been. I think it's just simply a matter of it's pretty clear when Paul says that a woman is not to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Now that may not mean everything. That may very well may not mean, and I certainly don't think it does mean. It doesn't mean that women can't sing hymns. It doesn't mean that if a pastor, when Paul says the women are to remain silent in the churches, that doesn't mean that if a pastor says to a lady, she's walking into church, hey, how's your mother doing? And if she answers the question, he excommunicates her. That's obviously not what it means. But we got to be really careful about pulling the trick of saying just because a text doesn't mean everything doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything. I don't know if I phrased that right, but I think you get the idea I was trying to get across. So that's oftentimes the gateway to liberalism is you say, oh no, I believe the Bible is inspired. I just don't believe that. I'll just define these terms down to the point where they mean nothing, and then I can accomplish the same thing that people have generally tried to accomplish by denying its inspiration. So I think in the end, I think you got to just take a step back and say, what makes you think that the text is unclear? And if really in the end, if what it actually is just simply, I don't like the implications of that being true. I don't like how that makes me feel like women are second-class citizens by saying that they can't be pastors.
It's icky.
Right. Then you say, well, all right, well, then the problem is not actually with the text at all. This is a horse problem. You don't want it to have said what it is that it said, and so you're wanting to find some way to just convince yourself, well, if it's vague enough, it's almost like if you don't want to find a guy guilty, in a murder trial, as long as you can just make the case for reasonable doubt, that's all you need to do. So as long as you can convince yourself that it might not mean the thing that everyone has said it's meant for a long time, then that's enough for you to be able to kind of do whatever it is that you want.
So let's remind everybody, we have a lot of young listeners who may not know that there's just not any history of ordained female pastors in our church, except in a few just cults and sects. Up into the late 1800s at the very earliest, and really around the turn of the 20th century, often in the Pentecostal world, the wild and woolly Pentecostal world, it just doesn't exist. So I do like to ask myself, as you referred earlier, why have we discovered these things after so long? When our grasp of the arts and languages and things like that probably have never been at a lower level in the general populace in the Western world. How is it that we've become so insightful in this particular area? Right. Yeah. It's a bit like with kind of my criticism of higher criticism is these kind of arguments of like they'll say things like, oh well, 1 Timothy probably wasn't written by Paul because the Greek sounds more like 3rd century Greek than 1st century Greek. And you go, don't you think the 3rd century Greek Christians would have known that? Like, they probably understood what 3rd century Greek sounded like. They probably understood the differences between 3rd and 1st century Greek a lot better than we do. And this wasn't a problem for them. So it's a lot of times that higher criticism is a lot of times I think people just trying to show off that they know something or that they sort of know something, and it's theology centered around trying to show people that you're smart. And in a similar way, I think a lot of times with this like so much of the cultural conditioning arguments are, here's what was going on with the cult of Artemis in that day, and that's why Paul's words need to be understood from that concept. But again, it just all falls apart with Paul's appeal to the order of creation. When Paul is going back and he's saying from the very beginning it was this way that man was to be the head of the woman. Well, and with all the transgender stuff and the 140 varieties of gender, natural law and natural revelation has probably never held less sway or never been more odious to well, at least Western persons. I don't think these ideas are terribly popular in much of the rest of the world, but they play in the city, apparently.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think with a lot of the transgender stuff, it's almost kind of driven by a covetousness of God's performative speech. That what you want is you're actually hungering for the ability to speak things into creation the way that God does. So that's kind of the whole concept of declaring your gender identity and announcing your pronouns, as though by declaring your pronouns that somehow makes the reality real. There's a ritualistic kind of aspect to it that shows that it's very much a religious structure to the thing.
Yeah, and these are maybe people who grew up going to the mall, to the Build-A-Bear store when that existed, or reading those books.
I can unfortunately confirm, due to a recent visit to a city where a third-year letterman may or may not have a premier timeshare condo, that Build-A-Bear is alive and well.
Oh, no. That's too bad.
Still there. Dare I say the line was out the door.
Yeah, and it's not just this generation that's had problems. The family has been in decline, and people are raised by people who weren't raised well. We're not just one generation into this problem. There's a great deal of pain and confusion, but that doesn't mean we change our theology to make it more to validate all these things.
The covetousness, though, is I think, Hans, you're dead on, and I'm rereading them all now, but the original three Thomas Harris novels involving Hannibal Lecter, but I'm reminded of his line, and Anthony Hopkins does a fine one, but when Dr. Lecter is talking to Clarice and talks about covetousness, we covet what we see every day, and how that just sort of like begins this sort of idea of like, well, now I want to bring this into my own existence, and as with another psychologically minded person we've talked about on the show, I don't want Hannibal Lecter as my pastor, but
no, that would be bad. I would also, by the way, make the argument that Brian Cox was actually the best Hannibal Lecter.
Yes.
I mean, I love Anthony Hopkins; he's great, but it was a campy, almost cartoonish performance. And so I'm more of a Brian Cox and Manhunter.
Rereading Silence, you're actually struck by that you actually want more of Jack Crawford rather than Lecter throughout it. But I agree with you. I love Manhunter and William Peterson's Will Graham.
So is it fair to say that a movement and innovation when it comes to offices and gender roles, that's sort of the canary in the coal mine for declension on scriptural matters, on doctrine in most Protestant churches?
Yeah, I think the issue is a bit deeper in that the problem is that we have embraced a very American and Enlightenment notion that that equality is found in equal opportunity, which in many ways there are many ways in which that's a good mindset to have, but it's not the way that the scriptures teach us to think. The scriptures teach us to think not in terms of rights, but in terms of responsibilities and duties and vocations. So that in the scriptures, you're called to be a husband, and when you get married, and so your job is to fulfill that vocation, to carry out the duties that God has given to you. You're called to be a husband, to be a wife, to be a father, to be a king, whatever that might be. And I mean, you look at the Old Testament priesthood, for example, and it's only the men from the tribe of Levi, and only certain men from the tribe of Levi that are called to be priests. But that doesn't mean that the men of Levi are somehow superior to the rest of the tribes of Israel. After all, Christ himself comes from the tribe of Judah. So, and the problem is that unless people completely disavow that mindset, unless you completely overhaul your way of thinking about human equality, and until you view it with the scriptural view that you are equal in the sense that you have been made a new creation in Christ, but you haven't been given the same responsibilities and the same vocations. Until you completely disavow that, it's going to be a major struggle to accept the male-only priesthood, because you're going to constantly be fighting this notion of, well, then we're saying women can't really be equal. As long as you think that makes them unequal, it's going to be a massive problem. And I think, too, kind of going back to something I was saying before, like, we didn't magically discover that Paul's words about who can be pastors were vague and ambiguous until we didn't want to do what a clear reading of them would say anymore. But the other thing on that whole issue is that Paul's whole point in 1 Timothy 2 and 3 is that the pastoral office is a masculine vocation, that it belongs to men, and it wasn't until God surrounded us with so many profound blessings that suffering and sorrow was so exiled from our minds that we all of a sudden realized that women should be pastors too. It's similar to it's kind of similar to, I think, how we view the whole idea of women in the military, and especially women in combat. That nothing tells you that people don't think people don't think war is real in this country. And I can tell you why people don't think war is real is because they're saying, oh, let the girls do it too. Because if we were routinely seeing our neighborhood kids, our sons, our husbands, our brothers coming home with half their faces shot off, coming home in body bags, you wouldn't have people standing up and saying, you know what, it's not fair that our daughters also aren't being slaughtered on the battlefield. It's not fair that my mom doesn't have crippling PTSD. So that the idea for women in combat only comes out of a world that thinks it's all pretend, or you're just behind a machine pushing a button. And in the same way, people think being a pastor is you're the person who gets up and says nice things to each other. It says, hey, be nice to each other. That it's like being your aunt at Thanksgiving who gets up and gives a speech about how great it would be, how happy God would be if we could all be a little bit nicer to each other. When you think that's what being a pastor is, then what the heck, you're a jerk if you won't let women be pastors. But if you understand the pastoral office as you're dealing with demons, that you're dealing with spiritual warfare constantly. It hasn't happened a lot, but I've had people say things to me in my capacity as a pastor where if a guy would have said that to my wife, I would have cracked his head open with a baseball bat. So that we recognize that out of love, we don't, in the same way that a man doesn't send his wife downstairs with the baseball bat to check out the bump in the middle of the night, but takes that responsibility on himself. So we don't put our women in that position, but whereas as men, we seek to protect them and we seek to provide for them and care for them. And when we don't see the pastoral office as a masculine vocation, when we don't see any real suffering in the church, then it's going to be very difficult for people to understand why it is that God actually limits the office to men.
Well, and ultimately, we don't have to like it, and it doesn't have to absolutely make sense. But if the Bible clearly teaches it, which we think it does, we should abide by it. So, which one or two scriptural passages would you immediately send someone to if they have questions about male leadership in the church?
Well, yeah, certainly these First Timothy chapters 2 and 3, which just very definitively go through the roles of men and women in the church. I think that's really your go-to start off place.
Yeah, and they're prescriptive. A lot of people like to use the narrative portions of Scripture where they can find something in one place that just describes something but doesn't prescribe something.
Right.
So yes, there was there was a female judge and there were female prophets, but that in and of itself does not we don't find any narrative support for this in the New Testament, but we see a positive proscription against it. So,
Right.
all right. Well, that's all very helpful. Well, before we go, one of the things we Presbyterians seem to be pretty good at it, like I told you, not being funny, but also being sort of very, very reticent to use satire or humor or anything like that. Let me share my screen because some might have caught this in the video. There we go. So that's the end of your video in the 80s video game font. Lutheran satire: teach the faith by making fun of stuff. I was involved in a 230 or 40 comment thread on a closed group for elders in my denomination, and it was all about someone who had sort of done a parody site of something, and a lot of people didn't like it. And it occurred to me at some point that they might not like Lutheran satire. But let's talk for just a minute about polemic, about the value of satire and humor, where we might find that in the Bible, and why you think it's okay to use the methods and the techniques you do to try to, as you say, teach the faith, and I'm sure you also mean to edify the church.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people are just not wired a certain way, and they don't communicate that way, and that's fine. There's plenty of ways that I don't communicate with people. There are pastors I listen to who are very kind of emotive in the way that they speak, kind of sentimental in their approach, and I don't respond well to that stuff at all. That would be very inauthentic coming from me, so it doesn't really work for me. But it doesn't mean that I don't think it has any real value. I think though, when you look at the scriptures, there are numerous examples of people using scorn, people using ridicule to fight against false doctrine. You see it with Elijah and the prophets of Baal. You see it with Jesus and the Pharisees. You see it with St. Paul dealing with the Judaizers. One of my favorite bits of all of the scripture, where he's talking with these guys who think that circumcision merits the favor of God. And he says to them, well, my goodness, if you think that cutting off a little bit of it is going to make you holy, you should just go all the way and cut the whole thing off. So it's a very common form of discourse. It's incredibly frequent all throughout church history. So
let me interrupt.
Yeah.
Let me interrupt. I was thinking about that today, and it made me think. I was thinking about that very thing from Paul, and it reminded me of my favorite movie, The Big Lebowski, when the nihilists say, we'll cut your Johnson off, and I thought, well, that's very, very Pauline. Mm-hmm. If you've seen that.
Yes, I like the part where they complain that what they're doing is not fair. And John Goodman goes, fair? I'll give you the clean version, but fair? Who are the nihilists around here? Like, you can't believe in fairness if you're nihilists. So yeah, no, that's it's the way numerous people in the scriptures discourse. My goal is I never, by and large, I never want to make fun of individuals. I mean, there are certain circumstances when the individual's persona is tied up in the theological error, so whether that's Joel Osteen or Joyce Meyer and stuff like that. But if I'm gonna do a video on Calvinism, I'm not taking jabs at specific Calvinists. I'm taking jabs at Calvinist teaching that I disagree with. And what I find to be helpful about using satire, using humor, is that it provides you an avenue to talk about something concisely and kind of get to the heart of something in a way that takes much longer to get there. And one of the things about humor is that it's when things are done kind of tongue in cheek, that it enables you to get closer to things than you might otherwise be able to get to, right? So that was like, if you ever watched old Don Rickles stand-up routines, where he would make fun of people, and the things he was saying were certainly true to a certain extent, but because he's doing it from a place of humor, then you're actually able to kind of get into a spot that otherwise you might not able to get to.
Well, and absurdity. So
Yeah.
what he was saying was obviously not true on one level.
Right.
So it wasn't as offensive as if he recounted your personal history and said,
Right.
all these absolutely true things about you.
Right. And I would like to note, too, that, and this was evident in the video that you showed, I'm much meaner to my own side than I am to anyone else. When I'm picking, now I'm not going to pick on Missouri Synod Lutheran doctrine because I believe it, but when I'm talking about the idiosyncrasies and the frustrations of and the sins of the people in my own, I will gore my own ox worse than I will gore anybody else's. So, equal opportunity offender.
What was the name of the confessional Lutheran?
The Reverend Martin Augsburg Ernst,
Yes.
voiced by my great friend Brian Wolfmueller.
Okay, that was he was excellent. So we'll link to the video for those who are only listening, and they can go watch it because the visual's important, but you do a good job with the audio. People that do films know that the audio is probably more important than the visuals.
That is true.
It's got to be good.
That's what made the Godzilla movies so successful. The audio was so good that everyone didn't have to pay attention to anything else.
That's right.
Dubbing stuff in is just fine. It's all anyone who's seen The Big Lebowski and the TV edit. This is what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the intent at all.
That I realized a while ago. That's a concept that my kids are not going to understand. I had that horrible experience as a kid of watching a movie on TV, not realizing they edited a bunch of stuff out of it, and thinking it was really great, and then suggesting it to my parents, and then my parents rented it, and we watched it for family movie night, and there was a bunch of stuff that was not on the TV version, and then I got in trouble.
What was it? Can you say it?
Well, I'd have to think about the specific ones, but that it happened more than once, and it also happened the other way when my parents had seen things on TV and didn't know what was in them not on TV. So I won't give specific examples for the sake of preserving my parents' innocence, but those are. My kids will never experience that because they watch the things unedited on stream. I don't let them watch garbage, but they don't know they don't understand the concept of. They don't even really get the concept of commercials. My 2-year-old doesn't. We put something on TV the other day that was not on Disney Plus or something else, and he did not get the concept of commercials at all. He's just like crying the whole time because his show went away after 11 minutes.
We did that. On a family vacation. We didn't have streaming. We just had whatever cable was provided in the unit. And my kids were like, "Why don't you just hit pause so we can like go back 10 seconds so we can watch this?"
It's amazing.
I think one of the later most famous ones is I'm so tired, or that's it. I've had it with these monkey fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday plane. Is another famous one, but it that's from a movie called Snakes on a Plane. Chortle.
I always liked
it's a movie about snakes
on a plane
and Samuel L. Jackson.
I always liked it when they had edits, so they dub in the non-swear word. That was not. It was a voice not even remotely resembling the original actor. I remember Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where the line it was the line about Cameron being so tight you could shove a piece of coal in his fist, and it was a guy whose voice was like a solid octave and a half lower than Matthew Broderick. It's like not even.
That was half the reason you wanted to see the TV premieres. Again, Samuel L. Jackson in Die Hard 3, there's a TV edit where somebody calls somebody a melon farmer.
I like that, though. I
That's
wish
noble,
people
that's
talked
noble
that way.
work.
It
That's
is.
noble
I like.
work.
I'm a Colts fan, and Philip Rivers was their quarterback this last season. And Philip Rivers is a very pious Catholic gentleman who does not swear, but he uses. It's weird because he's a Catholic, but he sounds like a Mormon when he talks because he uses Mormon non-swear words. And it's just sweet and wonderful, and I love it, and I wish more people did that.
Yeah, we going back to the commercials thing. There was, I can't like if you had told me 10 years ago that I would do this, I would say you're insane. I never want to see commercials again. But you can go on YouTube and like type in the people have saved the commercial breaks, like from all their recorded tapes.
Yeah.
And then like amalgamated. So you can have, here's an hour and a half of Nickelodeon commercial breaks from this date in 1997. It is an absolute time travel device.
I love those. My parents, when I was growing up, we used to record stuff off of TV, and we just didn't pause it, when the commercials came on. So at some point, I'm going to do this. I'll go through all those, if I can find them, those old videotapes with some absolutely amazing commercials. And I lived in Utah when I was a kid. I have not been able to find it. I've been praying that I can, because the world needs this so much. There was a public service announcement about not using dip that was, I think, put out by Utah public television or something like that. So it's a bunch of Mormon kids rapping about how you shouldn't use skull, and it'll bring about world peace if I can find it.
The internet will have it.
I've looked for it, man. I can't. I'll look again, but I have not been able to find it. But I know it exists. I know I did not invent it in my brain.
Yeah, it was to counter that the famous Earl Campbell, I think, Skull Brother commercial. Yeah, I'm sure that's what it was. All right, so as we do wrap up, often, several times when I've been arguing with people in a winsome way, I might have suggested to them that had they been around in the time of Calvin and Luther and Melanchthon, that they wouldn't have fared so well, because the type of rhetoric and back and forth and language and word pictures that the reformers used were not exactly in accordance with sort of the daycare ethics of 21st century discourse.
Yeah.
Has that ever occurred to you? I mean, people say, well, that was okay for Luther, but, I had a guy criticizing Luther today. He said, well, it was terrible that Luther published a woodcut of the Pope eating excrement, for example.
Yeah, I mean,
but I said, maybe they were visual learners.
What would you list that for on Etsy, do you think?
Well, I mean, first of all, the thing with Luther and the Pope is, if you get excommunicated and then the Pope says to the Holy Roman Emperor, "Hey, you declare that guy a heretic," and so that anyone can kill him, and he does that because you said, "Hey, this is exactly what the Bible said." You're allowed to get a little mad about that. Second of all, sure, the discourse was a bit different back then. So, but also, I'm not as bad as Luther. That's kind of the other thing. It's like I'm 1/10 as intense as Luther was in his discourse. So if you can't handle what I'm doing, don't read Luther. Don't read the Reformers. Don't read the Church Fathers. Don't read Paul. Anytime you see the phrases, the Pharisees came up to Jesus in the Gospels, you're going to want to skip a few verses. It's the way people talk.
All right, so maybe we're the ones that are weak, not that they were terribly nasty. So we do have a request from a listener, a nice lady. I don't know if she's a listener. I think she's sort of on the other side of many issues for me, but she heard that you were coming on, and she wants you to say the famous line, "Come on, Patrick," in the Irish accent.
Yeah, I feel like Bart Simpson in the "I Didn't Do It" episode of the Simpsons with this. It's very sweet though, and I do love that people love the line. But all right, oh, here we go for it. So, oh, come on, Patrick.
Oh, that was good. Yeah.
Thanks.
So that's from the which video was that from? Or you maybe
St.
used some
Patrick's
of them.
Bad Analogies, and then
That's
a bunch
right,
of other
yeah.
ones
Yeah,
after
the
that.
analogies for the Trinity. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I'll say this: my PCA pastor who is a Southern gentleman. He was the first person to show me a Lutheran satire video.
All right.
For what that's worth.
It's worth a lot.
Well, there's plenty to talk about, and we'll do it again sometime. And I can only say that there must not be many cool podcasts out there, because you usually seem to have time for us. So where are all the Lutheran guys?
Not many people ask for my time at 10 o'clock Eastern on a Wednesday night.
That's the secret.
So that's the
it's
secret.
Tuesday. It's Tuesday.
Oh, Tuesday. I'm sorry. Yeah.
All right.
Well, you should have just let me go and seen how much that messed up my week.
Anything you want to share with us about what you've got going on, coming up, places you want to point people, besides the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which,
Right.
we let you do the plug, but
No, yeah, I mean, we're just plugging away over at Prince of Peace Lutheran Church in lovely Crestwood, Missouri. So if you're in the area, come check us out. I've got some other videos. I have a video I'm working on that I'm really, really, really excited about. Incredibly excited about. It's a bit of a struggle because I got to figure out how to. I have some puppets I've been working on that I'm trying to get in proper shape to do the video. But there's an upcoming one. I don't know when it'll be out. But the title is Rebellion Song, so I'll just tease it with that. This one I think will be one of my greatest ever that I've done in concert with a very good friend of mine named Robbie Rojas, who's a pastor and a very, very talented musician.
well, we look forward to it, and we look forward running into you at that convenience store in St.
Yeah,
Louis
that's right.
County in late June.
All right.
So, all right.
God bless you guys.
Yes, thank you for coming on, and Resby will tell everyone good night. But we should say that, we expressed a small financial need on our Discord server recently, and all of a sudden our Patreon gifts doubled. So I want to say thank you to people who are contributing and some one-time gift special friends. So thank you to all. But Resby will thank you more generally.
Yeah, thank you guys for doing that. Really great, and thank you for everyone for watching along, to everyone who's going to listen on demand later. My dog was scratching to be let out, so I didn't get a chance to try to shoehorn my way into an important, thoughtful point from our guest. But I think the horse and bull discussion, I think there's a natural law argument to be made for it, in the way that we just so sort of natively adopt those distinctions. Because as soon as you wrote it, it was like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So if anyone wants to write that academic paper, it will be the first that I will ever read.
That's my idea, though. I'm going to write a book about it eventually, so no one steal my idea, because I feel like I can make some money off of that.
As long as you use footnotes, I'll count it as an academic work, and we can just we'll just call it even.
Footnotes are fine. Endnotes are of the devil.
Oh, without a doubt. But thank you, Hans, again for coming on.
My pleasure.
Thank you to everyone. Everyone else, enjoy our end bumper music, and we'll talk to you again on our next episode, where you will please don't be a nerdman.
God's word. We sang his praises with our songs and sat on the hard school seat and listened to the voice of the preacher man when he began to lead. Oh, preacher man, I still hear you today. Oh, preacher man, I still hear you when you pray. Down on your knees to God in that old-fashioned way. Oh, preacher man, I still hear you today.
Magic on the internet worldwide.